Here we go. Can we celebrate a waymaker this morning? Let me hear you put your hands together, make some noise. Woo! Some of you, as I hear you sing, as I watch you worship, you are there and you are celebrating the God who is a waymaker because you see how God is making a way. You look back at how God has made a way, and some of you, you are celebrating that. But I also see some of you who you are singing that but struggling to believe it. And you're not reaching out your hope, you're reaching out your desperation saying, God, I'm going through something and I need you to be that person. So this morning, I pray that you would experience the waymaker in a way that only he can show up and do. And as you're there again, we begin this week, looking forward to next week, Easter Sunday, the one Sunday that gives every other Sunday meaning. And we remember in his life, death, and resurrection, his victory over sin and death and the grave, he will always make a way. So if you're living in that miracle or waiting for that miracle, I just want you to know that he is a way maker, and I hope that you experience him this morning. Amen? Well, my name is Kyle. If we haven't met yet, I'd love to meet you. I'll be out in the lobby afterwards. And this week, we're in week 3 of a series called Walk the Walk. Walk the Walk is based on a theme verse in Micah chapter 6, verse 8 that says this. It says, what does God require of us? But to do justice, to love kindness, and walk humbly with God. And what we talked about on week 1 was the importance of both kindness and justice. Because in a world that needs both, sometimes we realize that kindness falls short. Sometimes kindness by itself can become people-pleasing or conflict avoidant or not speaking up when something needs to be said. But also, justice without kindness can become harsh, judgmental, and divisive. And in a world that desperately needs both, our world needs more justice and more kindness. The only way we have both of them is that third piece that most of us miss, walking humbly with God. In week 1, the big idea was that while justice and kindness are the fruit, humility, walking humbly with God, is the root of it. And I just want to tell you, I don't know where you are, but some of us, my experience is those of us who are best at kindness struggle with justice, and those of us who are best at justice struggle with kindness. Let me just see, raise your hand. Raise your hand if you're people like, I'm one of those people who thrive in kindness. Anybody? Raise your hand, me? That's me? All right. Anyone here, I'm a justice person? Justice, yeah, I like it, all right. If you are sitting next to one of those people, you can fight about that on the drive home and the rest of your life. All right, if you don't laugh, it's just mean. I'm a kindness person. I got to admit it. When I see someone, I can see the best in them. They can do the biggest, stupidest thing, but I see that little bit of gold. And I'm like, I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. I want to believe that people are doing their best. And sometimes what that does is it makes it hard for me to see and do justice. One of the reasons I actually think I love kindness so much is the time in which I was the best at justice was when I was in high school. Because when I was in high school, I knew everything. I knew what was right and what was wrong. And not only did I know what was right and wrong for me, I knew what was right and wrong for you. Whether we even met or not, I was so good at justice. But then I realized in some ways I've kind of swung the other way. And justice becomes a struggle for me. For me, it's a struggle for lots of reasons. One is because I'm afraid of becoming that judgmental person again. But also, honestly, when we talk about justice, I don't even know how to define it at times. When I say justice, I mean, what are we talking about? Because we have different definitions. I don't know the definition you walk in with. When I say justice, do you think criminal justice? Do you think social justice? Do you think justice is a thing that I do? Or is justice something that I need to fight for on behalf of others? And in these challenges, we come into this place where I think we want to be people who do both, and it is hard. And I don't know where your struggle is, but let me just guess. I've just been talking to people over the last few weeks. Let me tell you where some of the people in this room are struggling with this tension between justice and kindness. I've talked to a lot of you who are struggling to do both justice and kindness with people who you love, people in your family. Don't raise your hand. Are you saying, man, I got someone in my life and I love them, but I'm afraid that I'm being so kind that I'm enabling them. But I'm also afraid that if I do justice or what I think is the right thing, maybe I'm just being judgmental and I don't know. So I'm struggling to love someone who I actually love a lot. I'm struggling. I've talked to some of you who it's in your workplace. There's a situation that you're like, I don't think this thing is right, but it's not really my thing to do. Or there's someone above me or below me or aside me, it's somebody else's, and I'm afraid that if I speak up, then I seem like a know-it-all, or it's not really my thing, and I don't know what the just thing to do is. Some of you are struggling with kindness because someone has hurt you, and you want to be forgiving, but you feel like if you forgive them, what you're doing is saying what they did was okay, and then you've got to pretend like it doesn't hurt, which is neither kindness nor justice. I know some of you, your struggle is every time you turn on the news, you don't know what to make sense of it. Has anyone read a headline in the last 4 to 6 weeks, and you're like, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know what the just thing is. And sometimes if I don't know what to do, maybe what I do is I just go and live my own life and stay in my own lane, but I feel like if I'm doing that, I'm avoiding some things. But sometimes when I feel like when I look up or when I speak up, I'm in some world that I don't belong. And I just want to tell you, friends, that this is a complicated thing. And this is why it started with this idea of walking humbly with God. Because if you think that you are the one who knows justice, you're like 17-year-old Kyle, who thought he knew everything. And at that time, I thought it worked. Then I lived a little bit. And now I've gone to that other side, and I've realized that too much kindness actually is enabling and conflict avoiding. And so you and I need to come to God and say, God, I need to learn how to do justice better, and I need to learn how to do kindness better. And sometimes it's hard to know. And today what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at a real-life story of where this tension between justice and kindness is held. We're going to look at a story where injustice has been done, i.e. the just thing was not done, and it's created consequences. But there's also things that have been done that are outside of humans' control, and we don't know what to do with that. It's a mysterious story, but it's going to help us understand that the world that we live in is mysterious, and sometimes the answers aren't as clear as I want them to be. I wish they were clearer, but sometimes they're not. So if that's your life, we're like, I want to do both, and I don't really know always the best way to do it, come along on a journey of discovery with us. Go ahead and open your Bible to Ruth chapter 2. Ruth chapter 2, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a story. Now, let me give you a little background on this book of Ruth. Ruth is the 7th book in the Bible. So you go all the way to the left, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Judges, Ruth. I think I messed something up there, but it's okay. And what happens is Ruth is a very interesting book. It's only 4 chapters, and in it never clearly says what God does or doesn't do. God doesn't have a speech. God doesn't show up and do a miracle. And one of the reasons, is God absent? No. This is what happens. In Hebrew narrative, in the stories of the Old Testament, usually the narrative is intentionally ambiguous. Because the narratives tell real-life human stories of real-life human people, and a human will do something, and you're like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And the author's like, I don't know. Why? Because sometimes you and I do something like, was that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. But trust me, your spouse always knows. And sometimes in the mystery, it forces us to look at these stories and realize that sometimes it's more difficult to discern than we realize. And we're going to look at chapter 2 of this. And real quick, set up on Ruth. Ruth starts out with a story of a woman named Naomi. Now, Naomi and the people in Israel, they go through a famine. A famine is essentially there's no food in the land. It's an economic hardship. Now, I know you can't imagine what it's like for there to be a shortage of food or of toilet paper or expensive gas prices. None of you have ever lived through anything like that. And there's economic hardship, and people say, what do? Do I keep the job? Do I get another job? Do I keep doing my life? Do I cut back spending? What do I do? But it got to such a point where Naomi and her family have to go, and they move from the land that they'd been blessed with, the land that they had raised, the land that they had farmed, and they got to go to this place called Moab, a foreign country. They become foreigners there. And while Naomi's there, her husband dies. Now, something you need to know. Hebrew law has a system of justice built in. When something goes wrong, something needs to make it right. And in that day and time, what happens is if a man died and was not able to have an heir, an offspring, to carry the family line, who'd be able to help run some of the business of it, to have that partner of a husband and wife working together to raise this family, if they didn't happen, they had this law called the Levirate Law. Now, some of you don't know what that means. Essentially, this is what it is. If a dude died, it was his brother-in-law's responsibility to marry the widow, to have offspring, and continue the line. Some of you are thinking about that in your common day, and you're like, ooh, that sounds disgusting. I get it. The brother-in-law law, no good. I was like, how do we say it? Like, levirate is not a word you use. To say the brother-in-law law makes it sound weird. I was in one called the bro code, but that didn't work. But we've got this bro law that's supposed to happen, and it doesn't. Justice isn't done, injustice is done. Why? Because the person who's supposed to do it says, oh, it's going to be too expensive. We're in a famine, I can't do it. It actually wouldn't be that good for me and everyone else. So injustice is done. So Naomi experiences a famine. She's now an orphan, or she's now a widow, and she's a foreigner in a foreign land. And she meets this woman named Ruth. Ruth marries into the family, and Ruth becomes this central story, and she's actually a foreigner, a Moabite woman who becomes a central part in the story of the history of Israel, so much so that there's a book of the Bible named after her, and Ruth becomes named in Jesus' genealogy. This foreigner becomes a central part in this story where everything has gone wrong. Famine, widow. The brother-in-law doesn't step up to fulfill the bro code. And now here they are, helpless. This is what happens, and it sets up chapter 2 as we try and say, what does justice and kindness look like? Ruth chapter 2, verse 1, we'll read through verse 7. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man in the standing of the clan of Elimelech, that's her deceased husband, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, let me go back and pick some leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turns out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just as Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters, the Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they answered. Boaz asked the overseers of the harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? The overseers replied, she's a Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. Pause. Some of you are like, what is going on here? What you have to understand is built into the God's understanding of justice is this idea called gleaning. Say it with me on 3. 1, 2, 3, gleaning. Now, some of you, gleaning is what you try to do as you just try and read the main points of a thing before the test comes up the next day. That was me. All right, just me. Okay. Gleaning in the Old Testament is essentially a system that worked like this, is when you were harvesting your field, you were intentionally supposed to let some of your crop go unpicked. They said the corners of the field, don't pick it. Why? Let people who need it more than you come. There was these folks, we talked about in the first week, we called them the poor four. Orphans, Levites or the priests, the foreigners, and the widows. They didn't have the ability to harvest their own food and fruit from their own land. So what they would do is they would come and gather the leftovers. This was called gleaning. It's kind of a beautiful thing. You see, this idea was not that you'd go and hand it out, but these people would have the opportunity to participate and harvest and have the dignity of working and being part of it. It's a beautiful part that doesn't just enable folks, but requires them to participate in it. But here's the other thing. This gleaning thing, as a German, feels like the worst thing you could ever do. As a German, I've grown up to be as efficient as possible. If there is fruit left over, it is a problem. We need to build a system, Ein's fine, build some sort of better picker, and pick every little bit of it. Why? Because I want to maximize every bit of fruit and every minute of every day. I'm losing you right now. Okay, you guys are looking at me like I'm crazy. Because for me, my bent, efficiency, how much can I get for myself? How can there be nothing wasted? Whereas God's perspective is everything you have belongs to God. And it's not about waste. It's about an opportunity to bless somebody else. Friends, let me be clear. One of the things that prevents us from being people who are more kind and more just is our love of efficiency. We are so busy in our schedules, we can't do what Boaz does, where Boaz is like, hey, who is that woman over there? She doesn't look like she's from around here. We don't have time to stop and ask that question because we're already running late to the next thing. Some of us, we don't have a little bit of extra money left over because we've always found a way to spend every little bit of it, and we live in this financial tightness, and what that does is it makes us afraid, it makes us nervous, and we have this fear that we're gonna run out of money. So when gas prices go up, what happens is we get a little nervous and we tighten up, and it's harder for us to be generous because we're afraid that we're gonna run out. I talk to people, again, I'm not trying to throw stones here, I'm just trying to say it. People who are going into retirement who have been incredibly generous, and at this time now they're struggling to figure out, can I be as generous? Why? Because I'm afraid. There's an economic fear in our world right now. There's a scarcity of time, but there's this other thing that's preventing us from doing it, is we don't have encounters with people who look like us, vote like us, and live like us. So it's hard to see other people. We have dividing walls, whereas Gleaning was a way of breaking down the walls and bringing people together. Where else other than in a Disney or a Hollywood movie does the Prince of Boaz come with this foreigner woman and all of a sudden, boom, look at that. There's this moment. Gleaning creates an opportunity to dignify these struggling folks who we would call poor, but also to humanize both of them. And what happens in it? It's beautiful. Boaz sees, he asks a question, and this is what happens. She, this is Ruth, came to the field and remained there until morning, till now, except for a short rest. Essentially, she is working her tail off. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Do not glean in another field. Don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work here. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. Don't just come and have the leftovers. Come and actually be part of our family. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked, why have I found so much favor in you? I am a foreigner. Boaz replied, I've been told of all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. Now you left your father and mother in your homeland to come and live with a people that you did not know before. May God repay you richly for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wing you have come to take refuge. She said, may I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, although I do not have standing as one of your servants. At mealtime, Boaz come to her and said, come over here, dip your bread in the wine vinegar. She'd sat down with the harvesters as he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all that she wanted, and she had some left over. What is going on here? There's this contrast that's happening here. When Naomi's husband died, the bro code was what someone was supposed to do was both marry her, but also what happens is she was forced to sell her land and move to Moab. So when she came back, a family member was supposed to buy that land. Bro code isn't there. The land rules are not being followed. And here's a man, Boaz, who doesn't ask the question, what is the minimum I can do? What he does is says this. He walks and sees and affirms the humanity of someone who maybe doesn't speak the language, who has no standing, and says your standing is not based on your ethnicity. Your standing is not based on what the minimum is. The standing is based is that you are a human being. You see, friends, sometimes when I see ourselves in these moments where we're torn, we ask our questions, what is the bare minimum? But when we see everybody as a human being created in the image of God, it changes everything. Let me explain. I've told you I've always struggled with the question of what the just thing is. When I was in graduate school, I took a class called International Business. Now, the class was taught by someone who had started her career and now taught students how to kind of get started trading things internationally. You'd find buyers in the United States who wanted something, you'd find suppliers overseas, and you kind of became the broker. You got to make a little bit of money on it. And so I remember one of my first opportunities doing this, I was working on a deal, brokering a deal of t-shirts. Now, for me, who knows nothing about fashion, to be in the fashion business is ironic enough. But we're negotiating this deal, literally hundreds of thousands of t-shirts. And I realized that the difference between whether the deal would go through or not was literally pennies per shirt. And as I was in the stress of it, and I took a step back and I realized, oh my gosh, what would people do to make this deal happen? What would they do to save a penny or two or three? And what would the cost of that be? And who's paying the cost of that? And so I was like, I don't know if I want to continue in this business because this business does not seem just, nor does it seem kind. There's got to be a better way. And so what happened is I went and tried to find another way, and I found another country that was known, or another company that was known for producing clothing in an equitable way, in a just way, of paying their employees well, taking great care of them. I was like, that'd be a great company to work with. Until 6 months later, I found out the CEO of that company was a creep. And there were headlines coming out about all the different things that he had done to make it a toxic work environment, especially for young women who were working in the modeling department of his company. And in this moment, I just felt overwhelmed because I was like, there's no right way to do it. There's nothing to do. So I went to one of my professors, and I said, I'm overwhelmed by it. What do I do? I told him about all this, and he just asked this question. He said, Kyle, how many people have you asked for advice so far? How many people have you asked? And I said, nobody. I said, this is your first problem. You think that it's all up to you. When God has not said it's all up to you. What you need to do is go find other folks and say, how can you help me be a part of this solution? What happened was I was trying to do more than I could do. Let me just be clear, friends. When we get into these situations, sometimes what we struggle to do is we get overwhelmed because we try and do more than God has asked us to do. That you've seen a problem of injustice and you think it's your job to solve it. You've got to change your life to solve somebody else's problem. You got to write the tweet. You got to start the nonprofit. You got to do that thing. And what I want to tell you is that's not what you got to do. What you got to do is do what's up to you. Look what Boaz did. Boaz does not go and say, all right, give me every single Moabite who's ever come here, and what we're going to do is we're going to find a way to house and take care of every single one of them. What he did, he said, this person is in my field, and in my field, God has given me the ability to do something. So in my field, we don't do the bare minimum. In my field, we treat someone as a human being, and in my field, I do what God has allowed me to do. Boaz doesn't try to solve every single problem. What he does is what God has enabled him to do. So let me ask you this. In these situations that are overwhelming and no one person can solve everything, what do you do? Let me just tell you this first. I want you to help find your identity both as a Boaz, but also as a Ruth. Let me say it this way. When we walk out of this room saying, oh, I'm Boaz, I'm always Boaz, I've always been that, what you do is you think, oh my gosh, I've got it all together. It's my job to help other people, and what you do is you begin to look down on them. But when you look at yourself, oh my gosh, I'm a Ruth. The deck is stacked against me. There's problems that I can't solve. What happens is you become a victim in that situation, and you become powerless. The way you become powerful is you look and realize what's in your field. Let me start bringing this together. There's times in my life where I've been Boaz, and there's times where I've been the Ruth character. Let me tell you about the times where I've been the Ruth character. Let me tell you that when I was in college, I was broke as a joke. I was going to a private Christian school, getting a degree in Bible. Anyone who's doing career counseling, none of your career counselors say, go get a degree in Bible and go to a really expensive school. That's going to be a great career choice. It's not. So in those moments, I was working at a church, and I couldn't afford anything, and there was a family at that church that said, hey, we're empty nesters now. We can't take care of everything, but for the summer, you can come stay with us. And guess what? You're not just going to have a room, and you're not going to pay rent, but we're going to invite you to have dinner with us as much or little as you want to. I know you're a college student, so again, you don't always have to. In that moment, I was vulnerable, and someone found a place for me, but they didn't just give me the basic minimum. They gave me a relationship as well. When I graduated from graduate school, my wife and I, we moved from Southern California to Northern California. We knew nobody. We had no grandparents, no nothing. And when we had our first kids, I was the only person, how do I say this nicely? My wife and I decided it was best for her to stay home with the kids, so we were surviving on one income. We were, again, broke as a joke with kids. But let me tell you this, for the first 4 years my kids were alive, I did not pay for babysitting once. So I'm like, how'd you pull that off? Was I taking advantage of one? No. There were people in our church who said, you need a date night, and I know you can't afford it. We're not going to pay for your date, but we'll come and we'll babysit. And they knew this. It wasn't just a financial thing. We didn't have grandparents living there. So for the first 4 years, we had these people who were part of our church who became Boazes to us and said, here's what we can do. We can take your kid for a little bit of time. I thought they were doing it because I loved it. I also found out it's because most of them had teenagers, and their teenagers weren't as nice as my little brand new babies were. So they weren't all saints. But there was a piece there. Do you get that? And in these moments, I think about what other folks have done for us. So now when I have an opportunity to do something for others, let me tell you, when we had a staff member a few years ago who was working in our youth ministry team and they had a kid, hey, come drop it off at our house. Someone's done that for me. When I had an opportunity to take care of somebody else, there's a friend of mine at the gym who they're having their very first baby and they're broke as a joke. And I was like, hey, here, let me do this. Let me help you go on one last nice date to a restaurant I know you can't afford before the baby comes in. And I didn't want her to know it was me. So I actually talked to her brother and say, don't tell her it came from me. But what I want to do is someone did this for me. Now I want to do it for you. Go on one last nice date. But now, in my life, there's moments where I realize that there's a field that God's given me. I'm trying to give you lots of practical examples so you can start to see what your field may be. Stick with me, because some of these are going to stick. One of them, let me just tell you again, as the pastor of this church, so much of what we do is, again, trying to create spaces for people to encounter God. And we want to do it with justice and kindness. And there's a story I'm going to tell. I'm actually a little embarrassed about it. A while back, we were looking through our employees' benefits packages, and we realized there was two different policies. One policy for pastors, one policy for non-pastors. And what happened was pastors actually had a larger percentage of their dependents' benefits insurance paid for, which, can I be honest, is kind of the practice of churches throughout the country. I never thought anything of it. And then a member of our HR team looked at it and said, why do we have these two different classes? And I'm like, we shouldn't. We need to change that. And fortunately, no one had been impacted in the time that I'd been here, but I was ashamed that there was this unjust system right there in front of me, and in that moment, I had the power to do something about it. And so we did. There's times in fields, I lead a lot of meetings, and I know that some personalities, some people get interrupted more than other folks in meetings, because there's some people who feel more comfortable talking over folks than others. And in my meetings, I say, hey, people are not going to be interrupting other folks. And when that happens, I say, stop, because it's my job to make sure everybody has a voice. Do you get that? You have a field. You have a sphere of influence that is the 24 hours of the day that you have. That is whatever resources God has given you, which is the people that God has entrusted to you. And there will be opportunities where you can do the bare minimum. Don't be that person. Be the Boaz who says, I'm not going to do the bare minimum, but I'm going to affirm the humanity of the person in front of me and go above and beyond. Why? Because every single one of us, without the grace of God, is a Ruth. Everything I have is not based on the work of my own hand. It's based on the gift that God has given me. You see, I was powerless to sin until Jesus came and took the place and paid the price and did justice on my behalf, paid the price for my sin, and gave me the ability to overcome it. Jesus was the Boaz for me and my sin and yours. And he paid the price. You see, as we wrap up this series, we talk about this need that a world that has both more justice and more kindness. And I want to tell you, do what is up to you. You don't have to fight every single battle. You don't have to stand up for every single person, but you have to do what is up to you and look in that field to do it. Because there's one who's done more than we could ever realize, and his name is Jesus. As we wrap up this series, I want you to end with this picture. We talk about this need for justice and for kindness, for truth and for grace. You see, in John's gospel, John chapter 1, it describes Jesus. It says this, it says, Jesus became flesh and he walked among us. And he says he was full of two things. He was full of grace and he was full of truth. Or maybe in our series, full of kindness and full of justice. There is only one human being who can be full of kindness and full of justice. And he is the one who walked most humbly with God. It's Jesus Christ himself. And when we start with this thing that Jesus did for me what I couldn't do for myself, it makes me want to change. But also makes me realize that not everything in the world I've got to change. When I realize that he is the one full of grace and truth and not me, what I can do is I can look at some headlines that I want to understand and I want to know what is the right and the wrong thing to do here, and I can realize I don't have to because Jesus knows. There's a situation that I want to change, and in that moment when I go in thinking that I'm the one who gets to change it, what happens is I think too much of myself. But when I come in and saying, oh my gosh, Jesus is already at work here. Jesus, what are you doing? What are you doing in my field? How can I partner with you? What happens is the stress of, am I doing it right, gets transformed to what is the most that I can do. It goes from, what can I get away with, to, no, this is my new identity. If I'm a Jesus follower, I want to be the embodiment of grace and truth, of justice and kindness. It's no longer what can I get away with, it's what by God's grace and by God's power can I do. You see, the gospel, the good news of this is that we're free of the power that prevented us from being slaves to injustice, and unable to be kind. And the Spirit empowers us. But also there's fights that we just can't win, and then there's moments we say, God, I've got to entrust that to you. And somebody say, no, is that being passive? No. It's realizing what is in your field. So in this, I want to end with a prayer. I want to end with an invitation. I want to end with an opportunity for you to stop and say, God, in the world around me, in my field, where have I been a Ruth? And God, by a miracle, or God through his people, has taken care of me. So I can say thank you that he was the way maker. He was the miracle worker. He was the promise keeper. He was the light in the darkness. And God, thank you for that. And you can look for those moments where you say, God, use me, not to do the bare minimum, but to do what I can do only because you've entrusted it to me to do, and now I can do it. There will always be moments in which you are a Ruth, and you are vulnerable and powerless. And there will be moments in which you are a Boaz, where God has given you influence to see something that's wrong, to speak up, to do more than just the minimum. And the way you do both is walking humbly with God. Let us be a church who is not overwhelmed by all the things that are wrong, but overwhelmed by the things that we get to do in partnership with God. That is what walking humbly with God looks like. Will you pray with me? God, we come before you and we confess that we want to be people of justice, kindness, and humility, and we've all failed. We failed by trying to do too much, thinking too much of ourselves. We failed by not doing enough. Because it was too scary, too costly, too inconvenient. We confess that as well, God. So, Lord, I pray that Jesus, because you left the field of heaven and stepped into our vulnerability, that we would see and appreciate the way that you are full of grace and truth. God, give us clarity about our field and our boundaries of what you've asked us to step into and what you've asked us to let go of. God, we don't know. We're not wise enough. So God, give us wisdom. God, give us open eyes to see when things are wrong. Give us the words to speak up when it's easier to shut up. Give us relationships that both humble us and lift up others. God, help us walk the walk. We can never do it alone. So God, by your grace and by your power, help us walk humbly with you. In Jesus' name, all God's people said, amen.